loan amount and is payable at a rate of 5.5% per annum during the grace period of 5 years. C, the interest is payable semi-annually at a rate of up to 5% per annum at the expiry of the grace period of 5 years. And D, a commitment fee of 0.75% is payable on the disbursement of the loan. Minister for Tourism and Member for Ancillary Canneries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thought that this was a very straightforward resolution put forward by the Minister of Finance. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely surprised by the level of drama and excitement I've seen so far, which has characterized this debate. Mr. Speaker, this is a very simple matter. The airport project has been conceived many decades ago and has been seen, Mr. Speaker, as one of the cornerstones or one of the important projects upon which tourism advancement and growth and development would take place. And so, Mr. Speaker, while there have been many attempts, there have been a failed attempt, for example, by the previous administration in their term between 2011 and 2016. Mr. Speaker, despite criticizing the move by the then Stephenson King-led administration to implement an airport development fee, the then St. Lucia Labour Party government, upon taking office between 2011 and 2016, did, Mr. Speaker, resort to a cabinet conclusion where the cabinet made a decision, and the document was made here in this House, Mr. Speaker, to raise the airport development tax. Mr. Speaker, I think the proposed amount was $55. But in this resolution, Mr. Speaker, which we have presented to this House, presented by the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Speaker, there are two different revenue streams. One, Mr. Speaker, is a $35 which goes towards the payment of the airport development tax. And the other one, Mr. Speaker, is an extra $38, which, Mr. Speaker, will then allow government to finance other initiatives, such as roads and so on. And we would see clearly that one of the projects that have been highlighted to be developed and implemented in this initiative is our road development program. Mr. Speaker, I will come back to the financing arrangements later. But what I want to focus on, Mr. Speaker, is the overwhelming excitement, the overwhelming expectation, and the overwhelming rejoicing and gratitude that takes place at this present time in the tourism industry. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is widespread consensus within the tourism sector that this project will take tourism to new levels. Mr. Speaker, this is a very proactive approach by our government. When we look in the pipeline, you see that not only are we growing very quickly in terms of the airlift, in fact, this winter we grew our air seats by 19% when we had 7 additional flights from American Airlines, and several US carriers, Mr. Speaker, began their winter months a bit earlier and ended the summer months a bit later, thus, Mr. Speaker, adding significant dividends to our air seats. Mr. Speaker, we have presided in this administration over 2 consecutive years of 10% arrival growth in stayover arrivals. Two consecutive years of 10% growth, Mr. Speaker. It means, therefore, that as we negotiate additional airlift, such as the one that is coming in December 21st, when we welcome an additional flight from American Airlines out of Chicago this time, and it's a weekly flight. It means, Mr. Speaker, that this added capacity in air seats will no doubt have significant demand on the apron facility. Already when we look at the Urinora International Airport, it is maxed to the point, Mr. Speaker, that when we look at the bank of the flights and the time when they arrive, especially on weekends, it is a nightmare on our airport. It doesn't lend itself, Mr. Speaker, to a world-class destination, providing customers with a very good first-hand welcoming experience that world-class tourism destinations are required to give. Mr. Speaker, the facilitation of passengers has also become somewhat paralyzed because of a lack of space. And we've been through all of this, and there is now overwhelming consensus on both sides of this House that this project is absolutely necessary. And so, Mr. Speaker, for more than one reason, I give this my overwhelming support and my very tacit endorsement. Mr. Speaker, the terms of this loan is very, very clear, and I am satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that in the terms here, it leaves St. Lucia in a very good position of cash flow and in a very good fiscal position. Mr. Speaker, a 5-year grace period has been outlined in the resolution. In the first 5 years, Mr. Speaker, there's going to be 5.5% and a 5% for the remainder of the tenure of the loan, thus making this a very comfortable arrangement, Mr. Speaker, for the government's fiscal position to be able to repay this loan. Mr. Speaker, we've heard so much about what this would do for the expenditure, but we've heard nothing. We've seen 5 speakers stand up today, and none of them, Mr. Speaker, took the opportunity to say that in the revenue, there will be a $78 million revenue added by this initiative. And so when you hear them talk about outsourcing and all kinds of different things and trying to scare the population as it pertains to the loans or the level of loans that we're borrowing, Mr. Speaker, what they have failed to identify is that there is a $78 million annual revenue when we look at the current tourism arrival numbers. So pegged at 396,000, it's over 78 million. And Mr. Speaker, as we get new airlift and the destination improves in terms of arrivals to our shores, we will no doubt see this figure going above $80 million. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is a fundamental point, that the revenues that will be derived from this arrangement will no doubt be in good stead. But a point to note, Mr. Speaker, in the loan arrangements is that out of $73 in increases to the total airport fees. So it's presently at 25. Departure taxes have been raised by $38. And, Mr. Speaker, there's a $35 in airport development fee. The $35 US, Mr. Speaker, goes to repaying the loan. But there is still an additional $38 US per passenger by 396,000 passengers, or about 40 million additional monies that government can use to finance existing arrangements. Mr. Speaker, the question then becomes, when you have an undertaking that is so viable, that has such great revenue potential, do you then, Mr. Speaker, outsource that undertaking? And so, Mr. Speaker, I think that there's great appreciation on this side for outsourcing and privatizing certain government initiatives and government institutions or certain activities of the government. But, Mr. Speaker, this blanket statements that have been made this morning, Mr. Speaker, without going through and making sure that you do this on a case-by-case basis is absolutely flawed. And we've heard it this morning. And so, Mr. Speaker, once the enterprise provides an opportunity for profit to be made, then the question becomes who should be in control of the money? And this is the overriding difference between the two philosophies that have been posited here today. We're saying that SLASPA has proven and they have turned over profits, Mr. Speaker, and we have made it as a document of the House, and in the Social Economic Review we see monies that they have rebated to central government from their operations. And we see, Mr. Speaker, that consistently over the last 5 years that SLASPA has been turning over profit. It shows that they're an institution that has been tried, they have been tested, Mr. Speaker, and they have proven themselves that they are capable of running the airport. And so, Mr. Speaker, when you've got such great revenue streams to play with, why would you want to outsource it and give control to foreign entities to do what you can do for yourself? That is the point. And so, Mr. Speaker, this, though, this position posited by the SLP somewhat collides with their overwhelming and vehement criticism of what they accuse the government of embracing foreigners. And you would have heard the mantra FFF, friends, family, and foreigners. And that has been their new mantra, Mr. Speaker, where they have clearly said in the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker, that there seems to be something wrong with the embracing of foreigners. But just because, Mr. Speaker, we have come in and restructured an arrangement, an enterprise, Mr. Speaker, in the best interest of the people of St. Lucia and in the best interest of our country and our tourism industry, then all of a sudden it becomes fashionable to embrace foreigners. Mr. Speaker, the MP for Labrie had a very interesting debate where he said that even if we started the airport in June, we will not have time to finish it for the elections. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to assure the member for Labrie that what is being considered here is not politics, but what is being considered here is the development of St. Lucia. My good friend from Castries South, Mr. Speaker, spoke a lot, and not that I care for his views anyway, about the consortium of banks and was calling for transparency. And then, Mr. Speaker, he was joined by his, the member for Vieux-Fort South, who was calling for full disclosure on the and for transparency. He went on to say that Bank of St. Lucia was a public institution, and therefore that demanded, Mr. Speaker, that we indicate who the other members of the consortium are, and we've only identified Bank of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, this is a rather strange and consistently duplicitous comment that is coming from the member for Vieux-Fort South, especially, Mr. Speaker, when his silence on matters such as Grindberg and Rochemel continues to be extremely deafening. And, Mr. Speaker, while we will, I'm sure the Prime Minister is going to indicate a little later on why he can't or cannot disclose who the other members of the consortium are, Mr. Speaker, we want to assure him that everything we have done on this side has been transparent. We have told the people of St. Lucia when we will do something, and we have not allowed them to find out anything by surprises. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is in this vein that I give this project my tacit support. Then the debate went on to talk about borrowing. And I sat there and I listened and I said to myself, these honorable gentlemen, they have the nerve to talk about borrowing. Because, Mr. Speaker, you know, while we will come and political gamesmanship could be a bit poetic and could sometimes tell untruths, as we've seen many bandied around. You've had to ask the member for Vieux-Fort North to infamously withdraw a comment that he made. We see, Mr. Speaker, that the numbers don't lie. The Social Economic Review of 2018, which we have made in the House, is clear with a lot of stats, Mr. Speaker. And I want to share some with this House, which Mr. Speaker, will totally debunk all of the statements made by the opposition and all of the scare tactics that they have attempted this morning to posit. So, Mr. Speaker, the member for Vieux South said that borrowing in recent times have been at unprecedented levels. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know you know your numbers well. You will remember very well in 1997 when the previous administration, led by the same group, when they took over the management of this country, the debt to GDP ratio was somewhere in the region of 40%. By the time they left, Mr. Speaker, in 2 short terms, it went over 50%, Mr. Speaker, and it got close to 60%, an almost 50% increase in the debt to GDP ratio. Mr. Speaker, the debt stock of this country was doubled by this same administration. But the difference is, Mr. Speaker, is that they were spending the money on infrastructure projects that weren't given an opportunity to generate revenue. In this instance, Mr. Speaker, we are building an infrastructure project with a tremendous opportunity, and that is generating wonderful levels of revenue. And that's the big difference here. And so while we see that there's going to be $78 million generated, the ability to repay this loan is well within the capacity of this enterprise and this arrangement. And that is the big difference between the two sides here. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to also reference some other indicators in the social economic review. So, Mr. Speaker, commercial banks, a lot has been made about the level of borrowing that we are doing with the commercial banks. Mr. Speaker, I thought that banks exist to lend money. And I thought that if banks weren't lending money, then business is bad. Mr. Speaker, there has been, since 2013, 6 years of decline in the credit levels, according to the Social Economic Review, in the commercial banks. But, Mr. Speaker, in their liquidity, since the last 5 years, we have seen, Mr. Speaker, that their liquidity has increased by almost 100%. So we see, Mr. Speaker, that whilst the liquidity of the banks are getting a lot stronger and solid, we see that there is, Mr. Speaker, commensurate with that, happening at in the same period, a significant decline and a consistent and steady decline, Mr. Speaker, on an annual basis since 2013 as it pertains to the bank. This, Mr. Speaker, paints a very sorry picture for the financial industry. And so, Mr. Speaker, what this loan is doing, it is giving a new lease on life to the financial industry, Mr. Speaker. And so here we have a local bank that is leading a loan that has the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to trade money, to sell money, to put it in layman language, and to make a profit, Mr. Speaker, and to ensure that within a very important sector in the economy, the financial industry, that there is some level of sustainability. So this loan gives the financial sector a great opportunity to do so. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that my support for this is extremely strong. I want to commend the Ministry of Finance and their staff for putting together a very good arrangement and a very solid proposal, Mr. Speaker. And I have absolutely no concerns about the terms and conditions of this resolution. Mr. Speaker, I think that it is a very happy day for tourism. It is a very good day for jobs. And it is a very positive day for the advancement of the economy of St. Lucia. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Castries Southeast.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand here to lend my voice to the discourse on the issues pertaining to this resolution in this honorable House today. The resolution to borrow $202,500,000 EC dollars towards the Huronora Airport redevelopment project. Now, Mr. Speaker, in listening to the discourse from members opposite, you would think that it's doomsday and it's the end of the world. On the one hand, they say they support the project. On the other hand, they said that they had the plans and they had a master plan development for the airport. On another hand, I don't know how many hands they have, Mr. Speaker. On another hand, they are saying that you hold back the project for as long as you can. But this same government, Mr. Speaker, or these same opposition members, today, they are telling us that if they were there, the airport would have been finished. But the member for Labrie himself said, in the quotations that he was reading from leading persons, he said, who are airport experts, that the advice is you hold on to the facility you have there for as long as you can. In other words, until it falls apart, don't do anything with it. Mr. Speaker, we used to go to the airport. You used to see buckets and tins all over the place collecting water from the leaks at the airport. It was an embarrassing place for you to go to see that you are receiving visitors. When St. Lucia has been ranked so many times as the #1 honeymoon destination in the world. And that's the facility. That's the entry point we have to receive people. So you have to wonder, do members opposite really mean what they are saying? Because as I listen to the member for Labrie, who I think may be the most experienced person as it relates to airports, having worked at the airport himself, you would think, Mr. Speaker, that he would have a greater appreciation. Then you have the leader of the opposition, who was the Minister for Ports in the last Labour administration, with direct responsibility for the airport. And they come here and they tell you, oh, all you're going to say is, we were there, we didn't do it. So what am I supposed to say? You did it? If I go there, do I see a new Huronora International Airport Terminal? So what am I expected to say, Mr. Speaker, when I stand in this honorable House? I have to say that you did not do it, and the reason why you did not do it is because you could not do it. You heard them speak about projects. They spoke about the Choiseul School. And what did they say? We had put in the tenders. The contract was to be awarded. You sat on it for a year. You didn't do it. But the school has opened under a United Workers' Party government. So we didn't start it, but we finished it. So without starting the school, it is finished. So it must have dropped from heaven and find itself here. Or somebody said, let it be, and it was. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, if we are going to come to this honorable House and have an intelligent debate about the facts, you failed. You failed. It's not my fault that you failed. I stood up in this honorable House and I said to them, you don't agree with the process that UWP was following? You are the government of the day. You can discard everything that we were doing. And Hansard will show that these are my statements. And I said to them, do not stop the airport development tax. Do not do it. You may not have liked our method, but we are collecting the revenue. What did the member for Beaufort South say? Ably supported by the present leader of the Labour Party, the member for Castries East. What did they say? You have not put a block in the ground. You all are collecting money. We are going to stop it. And I'm not supposed to say that in the House, Mr. Speaker, when at the same time they came to the Honorable House and put a levy on people all around St. Lucia for water, for desilting the Roseau Dam, when they did not even have a plan, and after 5 years, they could not desilt the dam. So, Mr. Speaker, am I to take the members opposite serious when they speak in this House? Am I to say that what they are saying has some substance and it is worth listening to? I mean, we have to be real about what we are attempting to tell the people of St. Lucia. And when you cannot do it, keep quiet. Admit that you could not do it. You have a right to question. But I want to ask the members opposite. Didn't SLASPA invite the opposition to a meeting to discuss the Huronora Airport redevelopment project since they are in opposition? And Mr. Speaker, through you, if any member opposite want to answer, I will give them the opportunity to answer. Didn't SLASPA invite the opposition to a meeting to tell them what the redevelopment plan for the airport was? Did they show up? Did any one of them show up? But they will come to this honorable house and they will pretend that they are innocent, Mr. Speaker, that they didn't know anything and nobody engaged them to give them any information. Here's the difference between the two parties. When we were in opposition, the project had, the conceptual designs and everything had started under our watch. When we came in, we were invited to a meeting at SLASPA. The then leader of the United Workers' Party, the present Prime Minister, and myself went to represent the opposition to hear what the plans for the airport was. Can the members opposite say the same today? When they were invited, did they go? So if information is made available to you, you do not go and get hold of the information, but you want to come in the house and pretend as if this government is doing things that you don't know about. I'm supposed to take you serious? Mr. Speaker, it was an experience at that meeting. Because at that meeting, representing SLASPA as counsel was the former Speaker of the House who was Speaker at the time. Wow. As counsel for SLASPA. So here we are. Leader of the United Workers' Party, Member of Parliament for Castries South East, going to a meeting with the IFC for an explanation. And who is there to guide the meeting? The Speaker, not our Speaker. Under the Labour Party administration. The Speaker under the Labour Party administration. Where the leader of the, and when I stood up to when I was making my contribution, for some reason he must have thought he was still in the house. And he wanted to interrupt me. Okay. And the leader of the United Workers' Party had to remind him, this is not Parliament. This is not the House. We are here to discuss. So, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party must stop this scaremongering when it comes to things. When you are in government, you do your projects the way that you think is the best to do it. That is why the people elect you. Why can't you accept that this UWP government is governing in a manner that the people accept? You know, Mr. Speaker, what persons, members opposite must understand. We all have 5 years when we are elected. And if the people are not satisfied with us after 5 years, they will make their decision like they made with you. Don't come and pretend that you want us to do so well when we know you are hoping and praying that this government fails so that you get a chance to come back at the helm of governance in this country. Never. So, we look at what has happened. We've heard a lot of discussion. The member for Labrie said that if we had gone with the plan, the airport would have been finished. It would have been completed. But they're telling the Prime Minister, you cannot have your cake and eat it. But they want to have their cake and they want to eat it also. Mr. Speaker, I move on. Because I don't believe there was really an intention by the members opposite to build the airport or to even finish the airport. They had time. If they even wanted to start the airport, they had another 6 months before they could call elections. But you see, Mr. Speaker, it is instructive what you hear in this honorable house. So they believe, and I would love the member for Castries East to make it a document of the House, the list of projects that he was talking about. Because, Mr. Speaker, when you're doing so many things in government, you don't even remember all the projects that you are working on. Because you see, you don't have election in your mind. You have the development of St. Lucia as the focus point that you want to concentrate on. But as they said, even if we start the airport, we will not finish it for elections. Because all the projects have been geared towards elections. The projects on this side are geared towards the development of St. Lucia. Not about whether we can finish the airport before elections and we go and have grand opening. That's what they did with OKEU, you know, Mr. Speaker. You remember? OKEU finished. So you have a batem by OKEU. You baptize. Ek you bayano. Ek you febe. Ek you viali. You know, Mr. Speaker, you don't govern in this way. That's not how you go about governing a country. You have to look after the interest of the people. How could you build a hospital, spend over $100,000 for naming ceremony? You know, I remember, that caused me to remember the late Sir John when he said, United Workers' Party not taking part in Batem Popo. You know, his children, when they play in games, and they have a doll, and they want to name the doll, they have a naming, they have a little ceremony, you have a Batem Popo. That is how the Labour Party operates. You have a Batem Popo, by OKEU, ek yo feme OKEU, ek yo ali, ek hodia yo ka different bove. Of course, go and look at the services that is provided at OKEU today. Up to Saturday night, I was at OKEU, and I was quite pleased to see the services that are already being offered under this government at the OKEU hospital. That is the difference, Mr. Speaker. Some people can talk, some people can work. And this is the government of workers. And the evidence is there. You know, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party campaigned in 2011 on a platform of jobs, jobs, jobs. And I heard the member for Labrie. I took notes because I pay very careful attention when he speaks. When he is flying, whether it's at low altitude or at high altitude, I pay attention. And he spoke about where are the jobs, and he was trying to dispute the job numbers. Mr. Speaker, how can you dispute the indisputable? The fact of the matter is unemployment went up on the labor and unemployment is going down on the United Workers' Party. And you can count it by whatever percentage you want. It is going down. And you know, they try to play games as usual. So they tell you there are less job seekers in the market. So who said when you were there were not less job seekers in the market? Because there's a formula, there is an international formula being used to tabulate employment and unemployment. This is not an invention by the United Workers' Party. And we all know the formula is simple. Of course, if during a time period that people are so frustrated that they cannot get jobs, and they stop looking for work, then they are no longer considered part of the workforce. But that is not the case in St. Lucia. People have more confidence today, and when people have confidence, more people leave their homes and they go out searching for jobs. And the stats from the statistics department will show you whether jobs have been created since the United Workers' Party came into office. Let me use a simple number. The report, the statement by the Minister of Agriculture. Let's use very simple ones. No complications. How many more acres of land is being cultivated for banana production in St. Lucia? How many more farmers? And if each of these farmers employs one person to work with them, how many jobs have we created as a result? Mr. Speaker, the evidence is there. If I was opposite, I would be worried. You know why I would be worried? Because the numbers are looking too good on this side. I would not have a chance if I was in opposition. So that's what they're afraid of. That is why they will come and try to scare the people and make you believe. Imagine a bank giving a government a loan at a good interest rate, and the member for Beaufort South is concerned that we have negotiating skills, and the member for Castries East, oh, these are the best negotiators. That's why they say they can get it at that low rate. It's not my fault that the country didn't have confidence in you. It's the fault of your performance that caused them not to have confidence in you. That is what this is about. You see, when a batsman goes to the wicket and he has confidence, his likelihood of performing at the highest level is always better than when he's tentative and he's not sure whether he should play forward or backward. Usually he's stuck one place and he gets a prompt LBW. Okay, so Mr. Speaker, looking at the issue, the member for Labrie, again, raised the issue of the police force and the issues of security. And he said, while we are doing all of this borrowing, where is the money that we are spending on the police? Mr. Speaker, the member for Labrie apparently is still in flight mode. Apparently he has not landed. Because it's only somebody who is still in space would not understand that this government has done 10 times more for the police force than the Labour Party. From repairs to police stations, upgrades. Well, apparently he's not living in St. Lucia. He's stuck in the Republic. You know, Mr. Speaker, we have to highlight it. When we came in, none of the police boats were not working. The forensic lab was closed. Mr. Speaker, when they accused me of signing how many direct awards, ask them how many of the direct awards were for new vehicles for the police force. You know, Mr. Speaker, we are not where we need to be yet. But when you hear certain things, you need to respond. We are not gloating over, we have arrived and we have accomplished. We promised a new St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I heard the member say because of 2 years left, or election is around the corner, must be he calling the dead. 2 years to go. All the things that we are announcing, we had spoken about in our manifesto. I want that copy of the list of projects you have, Honorable Member for Castries East, because you did a very good promotion for us of where this government is going. And I know that's why the member is concerned. Mr. Speaker, through you, if I can get a list of these projects, I would appreciate it. Mr. Speaker, we are looking at the airport redevelopment project. We are looking at the formula of the St. Lucia Labour Party, and we need to be mindful. When you go to a financial institution, they evaluate you and they make a determination as to whether you qualify for a loan or not. And all of us who have gone to the bank wants to know everything about you. So you don't think the banks carried out a full investigation on the performance of this government and this economy before they agreed to give the government of St. Lucia a loan? You don't think that the bank did its due diligence? I've not even come to the issue, Mr. Speaker. The issue in relation to the performance of the bank and the losses that was sustained during the reign of the St. Lucia Labour Party as opposed to the profits that this same bank has made since the United Workers' Party came into government. We have not gone down that road yet. I don't know if time will permit me, but if it does, I will. So, the police force, and I applaud our policemen for being sensible, for putting the interest of St. Lucia above their own personal interest, in coming to the point to be the first organization in the service to have accepted the proposal of negotiations by the government of St. Lucia. There's the difference, because, Mr. Speaker, they have criticized us about that, but I want to remind them. The members opposite were the ones who proposed to cut the salaries of public servants by 5%. Today, on the United Workers' Party, is not 0.00 we give it. We're giving a 5%, 1% retroactive, and 4% for the coming triennial. Mr. Speaker, so when the member for Labrie will try to say we are borrowing, but we are not taking care of the other critical issues, we are taking care of all of the issues, but you cannot solve all of the problems overnight because the Labour Party left a mess when they lost the elections. Mr. Speaker, they spoke about where we are spending. They were spending $1 million on school repairs. So for the 5 years, they would have spent $5 million. And the member for Castries East was the minister responsible because they had moved the school repairs from education to infrastructure. Look, he's there, Mr. Speaker. Ask him how much money they were spending on school repairs in St. Lucia. Since the United Workers' Party came into government, in 3 years we've spent more than $15 million on the school plant in St. Lucia. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is not the building of the Choiseul School. That's not included in that. That is not the completion of the Dennery Infant School or any of the new facilities, We are talking about basic maintenance and repair of the school plant throughout the length and breadth of St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, the approach of development under a United Workers' Party government is a balanced approach that touches every area of development in this country. Mr. Speaker, The member said we are borrowing for or our borrowing is not even for marginal projects for development. Is the member saying that the airport redevelopment is not even a marginal project for redevelopment, when tourism is the greatest contributor? And not just tourism, you know. We are talking about stay-over arrivals. And the stay-over arrivals, 95% of them come through Lucia International Airport. How come a member of parliament say that the redevelopment of Lucia International Airport is not even marginal in relation to the development of St. Lucia? But in the same breath, they are saying we're not opposed to the project, just hold back for as long as you can. So tell the people you build in the airport, but you're not really building the airport. You're holding back. You're holding back. And all of the airports that, now look at the two countries that they chose to highlight. St. Vincent, that is next door. I didn't hear them say anything about St. Vincent and its international airport. But they cite Barbados and Jamaica. Why did they cite Barbados and Jamaica? Jamaica had no other choice for the airport redevelopment project because they were under fiscal adjustment program by the World Bank and the IMF. Barbados, debt to GDP, where is it at? And I know I can preempt them. They will say that's where we take in St. Lucia. But I will show you that you are wrong. Even in your thinking, you are wrong. Far less for your words. Where is St. Lucia in relation to these countries? So if Barbados could have done otherwise, they would have done otherwise. If Jamaica could have done otherwise, they would have done otherwise. And we are going to investigate the IFC proposal besides the direction that this government is going. So, Mr. Speaker, the project of the airport redevelopment is not just a marginal project. It is a critical project to take St. Lucia to the next level of development that is required. There is no getting away from that. Now, on the one hand, they tell you yes, but on the other hand, they don't believe that. Mr. Speaker, the financial logic and good management is not on the opposite side here. And I heard the member, he said, oh, they'll come and tell you it's as simple as that. So if it's not simple as that, what is it? Let me give you a lesson in simple ways that banks deal with things. And I've taken enough loans in my life to understand how this works. And you can go and check my records at every bank. I've never defaulted on a payment. And that was long before I came into politics. And I've always been self-employed, Mr. Speaker. I didn't have to have somebody pay my salary. I learned to pay my salary and to pay my loans. And so I want to tell them, they like to call me bus driver. But I have no problems with that because we made an honest dollar. But I will give them an example. When a bus owner goes to a bank and he takes a loan of $150,000 to buy a bus to put on a route, the bank assesses his situation and he is given between 5 to 7 years for repayment of that loan. And on what basis is he given? Today, if he does not have a route permit, the bank will not give him the loan. Why? Does he have the money to buy the vehicle cash? No. Is he guaranteed that he's going to get passengers on the road every day? No. But the bank assesses its risk look at the trends and the patterns. And I just had a discussion with the bank recently in trying to help out a constituent. And you know what the bank told me? Based on the route is the level of risk. So if you apply in the Castries to Grosile route, then your chances of getting the loan is better because this route is a more lucrative route than other routes that have less people traversing on a daily basis. What is the lesson here? So the bank can assess how many passengers that this bus is going to transport for the next 5 to 7 years, no matter what happens, and give that person a loan on the basis that passengers will continue to travel. Everybody in St. Lucia will not buy a car. There will be enough passengers so that this person can meet the monthly obligations to themselves and to the bank. Now, how does that apply to the airport? So, data in this country will show for the last 40 years, the tourism arrivals, the trends in the market, you have data for more than 30 years. You mean to tell me that as a country, as a financial institution, as SLASPA, nobody can make a fair assessment and a projection to say today we have had 400,000 passengers a year and a projected growth of 1% per year, to make a fair assessment that you will continue to have this number of passengers coming to St. Lucia. The other thing they tell us, Mr. Speaker, is if there is a hurricane, in the provisions of the loan, and we have done it for the farmers after Hurricane Thomas, the government spoke to the financial institutions for a suspension of the time period for repayment. So, Mr. Speaker, how did we negotiate? We negotiated that if there is an unforeseen circumstance that develops and we cannot pay for a period of time, that you are given this grace period to make up. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, the $45 airport development charge has a 20% cover. In other words, it covers the loan by an additional 20%. So when you pay what you are required to pay on a yearly basis, you save 20%. So in 5 years, you would have the payment for a whole year accumulated. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't expect the members opposite to understand that. I don't expect them to understand that because their formula, now look at the formula, Mr. Speaker. And whether they say to say it or not, I will say it, Mr. Speaker. 400,000 passengers at $35 per passenger for 1 year, $14 million. For 30 years, which is the concession arrangement that they were going into, would be $420 million. Now remember, the airport is costing $170 million. So, now their formula, Mr. Speaker, was not $35. When we went to the IFC meeting, the formula was $55, and the IFC said that the people are not willing to take this thing at $55, so they have to consider between 60 and 65. So I used the middle figure of the $60, and 400,000 passengers at $60 would amount to $24 million a year. And if you multiply that by 30 years, you'd get $720 million. And Mr. Speaker, as long as there is that issue, I will say this. You are telling me for a loan of 170 million to build an airport, that I should give it to a foreign entity. The same people, Mr. Speaker, who labeled this government as pro-foreigners against locals, wants to take the airport redevelopment from SLASPA and give it to a foreign entity to build and to be guaranteed a minimum amount of revenue for the 30 years duration of the project of 720 million. And that is if everything remains flat as it is and there is no growth in the airport or the arrival of passengers in this country. And you want to challenge the United Workers' Party on the basis of our financial model? And you want to tell me that your financial model was better than what we are proposing? Mr. Speaker, what they have not told us in their agreement, the present $25 that goes to SLASPA, what would happen to that $25? So SLASPA would become an entity of the concessionaire, and it's based on the concessionaire's profit that SLASPA would get a little return. Now the question is, SLASPA is one entity. It runs the port at Rodney Bay Marina, Marigo. It runs the port at Viewfort. It runs the port in Castries, and it also runs the Uranora International Airport and the George Charles Airport. A combination of all of these entities together make up the revenue stream of SLASPA. When you take off HIA from SLASPA, and if you recall when we debated the first bill, Mr. Speaker, when we debated the first bill, the member for Viewfort South said he knows that the people at SLASPA are rejoicing on the basis of the decision made by this government, because SLASPA understood what was happening. That when this concessionaire came in, SLASPA would now have to be an employee of the concessionaire. Because SLASPA on its own, without the operations of HIA Airport, may not have made enough to be able to run George Charles Airport. And I gathered it from the member for Labrie again. Indirectly, they were telling us the plan is to close the George Charles Airport. Because his whole argument was to create a hub. You need all the flights going in one direction. And I'm not surprised at that, Mr. Speaker. You know why? Because while we were in opposition, two members of the Labour Party were commissioned to carry out a study on the airport, on George Charles Airport, to make a determination as to whether it should remain or whether it should go. So, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party must come out clearly. The members opposite must come out clearly and tell the people of St. Lucia what their hidden agenda has been as far as the port services and the airport is concerned. Because there's a lot they have not told us. But they talk about transparency and accountability. So if SLASPA would become a subsidiary of that entity, because where would you think Port Castries alone could make enough money to keep the present structure of SLASPA? You think between Port Castries and George Charles Airport, if you remove all the benefits that is derived from HIA, and we know how these international entities work, Mr. Speaker. They know how to tell you they don't make profits. They know how to tell you, and it's only on the profit that they would be sharing. So, Mr. Speaker, the evidence is there that the approach being taken by the opposition was flawed. No prudent financial manager would go in this direction. You know, Mr. Speaker, So the IFC wanted in the region of $60 per head for the building of the airport. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are building the same airport, and we are able to pay, and both the Exim Bank and the local banks that is part of the syndicate understands that the $45 is more than adequate to pay both loans and to cover St. Lucia adequately. Now I need to say something here, Mr. Speaker. Is it going to impact debt to GDP? Of course it will. But this is a decision that every man has to make in his life. Will you ever take a loan to build a house because you'll be owing $100,000 or $200,000 or $250,000, but your salary is only $6,000? Do we ever do that? Why do we do it? Because you are building an asset base and you are building something that has value for the future. So at all points in our lives, we would get to a point where our debt is higher than what we are making on a monthly basis. But you see, the member for ancillary countries was making the point. The IFC, the World Bank, the IMF, all of them, they look at the immediate debt to GDP ratio and how it is impacted. Who factors in the new revenue stream that is created? Because, Mr. Speaker, what they did not tell you when they cited Jamaica and Barbados is that while all of these countries were charging close to $100 per passenger, St. Lucia was charging $25. So we had the leverage to increase our taxes to $98, a difference of $73. And I heard the member for Castries South, and he said that the Prime Minister said all the pods that we are building, that the airport development tax would be to pay for the port. You see, Mr. Speaker, statements are made and members opposite choose to use the selective part of the statement without reviewing the whole statement. So what was said by the government is that if Carnival comes through with the port development and that they bring in additional passengers, not the present number of passengers that are there, but the additional passengers that they would bring in, that part of that, not the $35, but the $28 from that would use to offset some of the cost for the port. Nothing interferes with the $35 that is there. And that is not even needed because with our present numbers, and that is why we know, Mr. Speaker, based on the plans of this government, that by the time we roll out the projects that we are doing, that if we have 20 years to repay that loan, we should be able to pay that loan in less than 20 years, maybe 15 years for that matter, on the basis of where we are going. So, Mr. Speaker, I see the member for Beaufort South is not here, but I want to remind the member for Labrie that what you could not do in 5 years in bringing down the unemployment numbers, they have gone down significantly under a United Workers' Party in 3 years. And that's a fact. Nobody, you can spin it, you can say what you want, but the facts speak for themselves. And Mr. Speaker, I heard the members opposite speak about what we cannot do in 3 years. Well, Mr. Speaker, they had 3 terms. You see, they're pretending today as if they have always been in opposition. They have 3 terms in government. Ask them to measure their track record of 15 years besides the track record of the United Workers' Party for the last 3 years. And not even going to the previous term. The last 3 years. Because, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia is on the path to growth and development under this United Workers' Party government. They said we were not creating sustainable jobs. But all of a sudden, I got a little feeling today that the discussion about Ojo Labs is changing. Because all of a sudden, they're saying the only thing that the government has done in terms of investment is Ojo Labs. So there must be some conversion on the other side there. Because people from their constituencies are being employed at Ojo Labs. Now, the difference between sustainable jobs and unsustainable jobs is what we are doing. We have not spent more money than them, Mr. Speaker, but we have spent the money better than they did. That is the difference. Because under their nice program, people were being employed in private businesses, and as soon as the government ended the program, the jobs ended. On the Ojo Labs, the people that the government is subsidizing, you see, under their watch, Mr. Speaker, the government was paying the full salary. Under the present UWP administration, the government is only paying a percentage of the salary, and then the company is paying the other percentage.
Honourable member, please be reminded you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will finish. So, Mr. Speaker, I am happy that they are able to acknowledge today that Ojo Labs is actually making a difference in the lives of young people in the south of the island. And there are also young people from Castries. They said they have not seen anything. I guess they don't pass by DSH. They said they saw 2 donkeys there. At least they have something there. What was there when they were there? The cows disappeared when they were there, Mr. Speaker. So at least if they have donkeys now, the horses will come eventually. Because it's donkeys and horses that go together. So if you saw donkeys, honorable member, rest assured the horses are coming. They are part of the same family. You see, Mr. Speaker, you can only see what you want to see. It is not just with your eyes that you see. You have to see with your mind. And that's the inability that they have on this side, Mr. Speaker. Because when you evaluate, you mean all the trucks that have been employed in Viewfort, all of the work that has gone on the horse racing track, there's no indication of a capital project happening. And I can say to them, government has not spent a cent on the DSH project that is happening there. And I want them to come and show. They say the road that we made there is for DSH. So I want to see if it's horses that will pass on the road or if it's cars that will drive. Because I don't know DSH is bringing cars. I know they bring in horses. But they said the road is for DSH. We will see as time goes on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move on to a couple of other issues. I've spoken about Jamaica and Barbados. Mr. Speaker, they don't understand years of cumulative growth. Now I want to ask the members opposite through you one question, Mr. Speaker. Just one question. Explain negative growth to me. Because that's a term that is frequently used. Explain negative growth to me. Because we come and we say the economy had negative growth. You don't understand cumulative growth, but you understand negative growth. So you will have to explain to me what is negative growth. Because, Mr. Speaker, when we speak about cumulative growth, it's just to help members who have a lesser understanding of economics, what we are saying. Because if you grew the economy by 3% this year, and next year you grow the economy by 1.5%, that does not erase the 3% growth that you had there. And I told them we didn't even use the compound method. Because if you use the compound method, it would be more. We use just the straight method of addition to just make a simple point that under United Workers' Party government, we've had 3 years of consecutive growth, while under Labour Party government, we had 4 years, 3 years of negative growth, 1 year of zero. And the zero was negative if I use the cumulative way of calculating. Yes, because the zero is on the lower number of the decline that was there. So if they found $100, Mr. Speaker, if they found the economy was generating $100, in year 1 it went down to 90. In year 2 it went down to 85. And in year 3 it went down to 80. The year that was zero was the zero was calculated on the 80, not on the 100 that they found. You see, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about growth, there's real growth, and the real growth has only happened under a United Workers' Party government. So when we grew 1.5%, the 1.5% was on top of the first 3.6 and the other 3.5. And then the 1.5 was on top of that because they were using the last figure. They didn't go to the best figure when we came in 2016. But this, Mr. Speaker, they can't understand that. They cannot understand that. Mr. Speaker, the bank today, Mr. Speaker, I bought some shares in the bank, in Bank of St. Lucia, many years ago. Not when I came into politics, before I came into politics. And I've declared to Integrity Commission, so it's on the Integrity Commission list. I've always done that. My shares in the bank. So Mr. Speaker, when the members will try and make people believe that things are so bad and the bank is taking a risk, Mr. Speaker, during the reign of the Labour Party, the value of my shares went down. The value of the shares are only going up since the United Workers' Party came into government and the bank has returned to a profitable operation. And let me tell you, government was not responsible for the poor performance of the bank. Government has never defaulted on a payment, whether the Labour Party government or the United Workers' Party government. No government in this country has defaulted on a payment. So the challenges that we were faced with was not because of government. So you are telling me, go and borrow all this money from outside institutions. Let them make all the interest. Let them make all the benefits. And our institutions do not allow them to float. They are making an investment in a good area. There is a guaranteed source of revenue in place to guarantee the repayment of the loan. And a government guarantee. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is not a direct government guarantee. This is for SLASPA. SLASPA has had a good record of performance in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, for the member from Viewfort South to come and paint some picture as if we're on the brink of the precipice, he should know the precipice because he led St. Lucia on top of the precipice. We have moved a few steps away from the precipice. And by the next term in government, we will be away from, there'll be no precipice in sight. Because only this, the members opposite know how to take this country to a precipice. And the track record is there to show that from the days of the late Sir John to now, St. Lucia has always done better in terms of development under United Workers' Party. That's a fact, Mr. Speaker. And so, they spoke about the VAT. Can you believe? I'll close on this point. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask them, the hotel development that they boast about, did it pay VAT? And if the hotel could have been given VAT exemption. Why is the member for Castries East preempting the next bill to say, oh, you're going to give VAT? So the material that built the hotel didn't come from overseas, but the material that built in the airport, the bulk of it is coming from overseas. Mr. Speaker, that is how, I don't want to use a wrong word for you to tell me, take it back. Mr. Speaker, this is how the members opposite try to mislead the people when they themselves have done worse in government. I reserve the words that I would use. But Mr. Speaker, VAT exemption is not something new. It is like taking money from the right hand and putting it in the left hand.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes in which to come.
I will round off in 5 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I must say this. If the government adds the 15% VAT to the project, you now have to go to the bank, borrow an additional 10% of 170 would be 17 and 9, 8.5. 17 and 8, 25. You'd have to borrow an extra $25.5 million to cover the VAT on the project. And if you, so think of that and think of the interest that you are going to pay to the project. And just to take the money from the right hand of government to put it in the left hand, and it is costing you that much. Can you believe that this is the economics followed by the members opposite? So they know how to give the hotels the VAT exemption because of what it is costing them. But they want to challenge the issue of VAT exemption on a government project of that magnitude. And I'm supposed to take the leader of the opposition serious? I'm supposed to think that this is an individual who wants to be the future prime minister of this country? Is that how he's going to lead the country? But I know why they go down that road, Mr. Speaker. Because I tell them, I've been around for a few days. And because I've been around for a few days, I know things. So when CCI was building the projects in St. Lucia, you know what was happening? CCI was contracted to pay the salaries of the staff of PCU. And CCI would pay the staff of PCU, that's the project coordinating unit, under the Ministry of Infrastructure, at the time Ministry of Communications and Works. And 1 week later, would go back and collect the money from the government with a 10% commission on top of it. And I want any member opposite who was in the government to challenge me on this and to say that is not true. So I well understand why they want to go down that road. That's not the only place. SLASPA can tell them. When La Place Carénage was built, they formed a company to be a debt collector for rent for SLASPA. And you know what was happening? That debt company was getting 15% commission. And the 15% commission was even on the electricity bill. So if Lucia gave them a bill for $100, SLASPA had to pay $115 for the electricity bill because the debt had to go through the debt collector. And the records are there to show that. But that is how the members opposite operates. And when this government, who are fiscal managers, who are prudent managers of the economy, come up with a program that is going to benefit St. Lucia and benefit the people of St. Lucia, I don't expect them to understand that, because the method of operation, they talk about foreigners, they know why they like the foreigners. If they love St. Lucia so much and they don't want the foreigners, why you want to get rid of SLASPA to give a foreign entity the concession for the airport for 30 years? If you are to say to a syndicate of St. Lucians, form a company, and we're giving you the airport for 30 years with that revenue stream, they can do it. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I lend my full support to this motion because the redevelopment of HIA is paramount to taking St. Lucia to the next level. And the financial model proposed by this government is far superior to anything that the Labour Party could have dreamed of when they were in office. And even now, Mr. Speaker, by the level of their debate, it is clear that they are clueless about how to make a project viable. I have every confidence that the team on this side will deliver. And Mr. Speaker, they want to tie me to the project. They want to find a way to tie me to it. But I have every confidence in the Minister for Port Services and the Prime Minister, who are quite capable of handling this project in a manner that when the time comes, they said they put the committee will have nothing to do, because this project will be delivered to the people of St. Lucia in the manner that this government has presented to this honorable House. I thank you.
Member for Dennery North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise rather belatedly to make a contribution on the motion that is before us. But like you this morning, Mr. Speaker, I want to profit the opportunity to express wishes of good luck to all the grade 6 students in our country who will be taking the common entrance exam tomorrow. In particular, the students of the Olia Combined School, the Richford Combined School, the Denny Riviere Combined School, and the Larissus Combined School. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to single out at the Tapio Private School, Chelsea, Kayla, and your own son, Aiden. I wish them well, Mr. Speaker, in the exam tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, truth be told, and I notice it is a caveat that precedes almost every contribution in this House. People always rise and tell you it was never their intention to speak. When I came here this morning, Mr. Speaker, I had absolutely no intention to contribute to the debate on the motion that is before us. And so I listened to contributions from both sides of the divide. And Mr. Speaker, sometimes you get the impression that the government expects the 6 of us on the opposition benches to come into this honorable chamber, sit still, and just allow them to have a free pass. It is as if we're not supposed to challenge, we are not supposed to argue, we're not supposed to express our opinions irrespective of how passionate we feel about the things we express. Mr. Speaker, we are saying that it is not often that we find common ground with the government. But we all have, either in this chamber or elsewhere, agreed to the fact that there is need for airport redevelopment at the Hironura International Airport. It is a fact. And for those of us who travel, some more than others, will admit that the infrastructure that is at Viewfort is in need of upgrade. And we support any move by the government to upgrade the Hironura International Airport. What we are saying here today, Mr. Speaker, is that the financing modality that is employed is inimical to the well-being of our country moving forward. We are saying that with a PPP arrangement, St. Lucia stands to benefit more than having to saddle our country today, Mr. Speaker, with a loan of almost $203 million. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries Southeast, and I've heard that in this house before, he raised the level of noise, but not the standard of the debate. He was all over the place. He was serving what we call a découché. All of what he said here this afternoon had already been said before. He was a bus driver. Nobody had to pay him a salary. And the same things over and over, Mr. Speaker. And you would have really thought that for someone who presides every year over in excess of $120 million, his contributions in this house would be a lot more enlightening and edifying. The same old rhetoric. When it is convenient, he resorts to the statistics of the day. So today, the statistics department is saying to us that the unemployment figures have gone down, and he is quick to embrace that. And it is as a result of confidence in the government. People are finding work. But he would avoid the fact that ever since his administration came into office, we've seen 120 to 150 murders in this country. Should he take responsibility, Mr. Speaker? And as I've said elsewhere, we will never use crime to score political points. But if you are going to claim the statistics when they're favorable, you have to own up and say that, look, we're making progress in this particular area of national development, however we faltered over there. He said that his administration, or the United Workers' Party administration, has done more for the police force than any other administration. And he was quick to say, Mr. Speaker, that he is not only referencing what the St. Lucia Labour Party administration did in the last term in office, but 3 terms. When the St. Lucia Labour Party, and I'm sure the member for Castries Central can attest to that, because she had direct ministerial responsibility for Home Affairs, the conditions of the facilities, fire stations and police stations, left a lot to be desired. They were in conditions that were not fit for human habitation. And it was the St. Lucia Labour Party administration that refurbished every single one. And there's another member in the cabinet who would have served in a senior management position in Home Affairs who can attest to that. But Mr. Speaker, as I said, I believe that there is need for airport redevelopment in this country. But it would be wrong, Mr. Speaker, for me to sit idly by and tacitly endorse in this Parliament the borrowing of close to $203 million for that particular project, Mr. Speaker, by staying silently in my seat and allow this to go without expressing my disapproval on behalf of the people of Dennery North, whose interest I represent in this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, this is a substantial amount to add to an already rising debt portfolio. Mr. Speaker, the situation in Barbados is next door. Barbados used to be in a situation where it was the model. Barbados was the envy of the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. And they were borrowing like there was no tomorrow. They were expanding infrastructure. And Barbados found itself in a situation today, Mr. Speaker, where they cannot service their debt on time, and every sector of the society is being made to pay in one way or another for the recklessness that took place in Barbados. So it is not enough for people in the private sector or those who believe that they are on the permanent establishment in government to just turn their backs on the discussion and think that they will be okay or it will be all right in the morning for them. In trying to address the situation in Barbados as we speak, thousands of public servants have been sent home. And Mr. Speaker, I would hate to see the day when St. Lucia will find itself in a situation where we have to resort to those measures to take care of what, if we do not address carefully, might very well be our fate. Mr. Speaker, the PPP arrangement has been cited by the member for Castries East. And he mentioned the Jamaica example. He mentioned the Barbados example. And I've said here before that an airport is not something that you give away. An airport is not something you can physically relocate. that a private interest will take it with them wherever they go. It remains in St. Lucia. All we are saying is that with the PPP financing arrangement, it gives the government greater fiscal space within which to maneuver to take care of programs that can impact the daily lives of people. Today, as we speak, there are still nurses who leave my constituency and go to work with hand sanitizer purchased on their pockets. They go to the hospital with soap bars from their homes. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, you can laugh about it if you want. You can laugh about it if you want. And that is the reality that confronts us today. And Mr. Speaker, we talk about fiscal management and how they are better managers than us. Mr. Speaker, the only economy that we perform better than in the ECCU was the Dominica economy, you know, where Dominica grew by 0.5% and we grew by 0.6%. So when we are being told that we are being managed by the best group of managers ever, when we are being told that we are being led by a government that is fiscally prudent, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of things that we must take into consideration going forward. This loan, Mr. Speaker, as we speak, cannot be in the best interest of the next generation. Yes, we need an airport. Yes, the airport needs to be rehabilitated and improved. But, Mr. Speaker, I am saying, and placing on the record, that the financing modality that we've resorted to by way of a loan is not in the best interest of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I can foresee down the road that if we're not very careful, we will have to grapple with a debt overhang, where, Mr. Speaker, we will see monies in the market that are there ready to be borrowed and loaned, but we will not be able to access those monies if we do not manage carefully going forward. Today, we are in a position, Mr. Speaker, where we can stay afloat. But let us not undertake things that will make it more difficult for us moving forward. I want a St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, that is going to prosper. I want a St. Lucia where my son can grow and become successful. I want a St. Lucia where we will be able to pay our loans. I want a St. Lucia where we'll be able to provide basic social services to the people of this country. But, Mr. Speaker, as an opposition, we have a moral responsibility that when we see potential danger, for us to come in here and objectively say that, yes, we agree with you for the redevelopment of the airport, but perhaps there is another way. And for this, Mr. Speaker, I am saying that to borrow $203 million, or close to $203 million for airport redevelopment at a time when an alternative source of financing is available is not in the best interest of the people of Dennery North, and it is not in the best interest of the people of St. Lucia. With these few words, Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and that is my contribution to the debate on this motion.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will do my best, Mr. Speaker, to be able to respond to some of the questions and points that were raised by members on the opposite side as it pertains to this loan. First of all, my good friend, the member from Castries Southeast, responded to him, but let me just reiterate that when we came into government, this project was nowhere near being completed. In fact, all that had happened, Mr. Speaker, is the process of how the concession was going to work is what had been negotiated with the IFC. In fact, even the design that was being used as the model was the design that was being done or had been done by Harry. In fact, SLASPA turned around and actually purchased that design from the Essenza group, and were using that design and paid for it. Yes, they paid for it. As I said, they actually purchased that design. Okay, so in fact they paid for it, purchased it, because it was part of what the consortium was already proposing, and they bought it from them. So in fact, that they were down to about 3 concessionaires in which they were preparing to send a final bid out to them on the project. And it was estimated, Mr. Speaker, that they would have paid them the $60. In fact, when we came in, the concessionaires were making reference to a number of $60. But they were also saying that the $60 was going to be insufficient, Mr. Speaker. So in fact, they wanted more than the $60 to be able to do the airport concession. The design had not been finished. Major details in the project had not been completed. So I don't know at the pace that they were going at whether in fact the statement that we would be opening up the airport today would actually be a valid one if we had continued going down the pace that we're going to go. The member from Castries South brought up some very interesting points. And I think it's worth it taking on those points, because I think that he was actually getting closer to really what the choices we have to make. So he's 100% right that when it comes to the stress of having to pay back the loan, both models address that issue, because both models were using an additional airport tax to pay for it. So this was not new money. This was not money that was coming out of the existing consolidated fund. So when we say it had its own revenue stream, the tax itself was being used, which was new, to be able to pay for it. So the difference really is the risk that you're prepared to take on in carrying that debt onto your GDP, or whether in fact you're willing to give the access of all of those revenues to a third party in order not to have the debt to GDP on your books, to increase the debt to GDP. And that when we looked at the concession, the fact is the concession was for 30 years. There was no getting out of that. Regardless of how well the country was doing, if we brought in a lot more tourists, if we doubled the tourists, there was no situation here where they would give back the money. The formula for getting back the money under the concession was if in fact the concession made money, that then they would share in that profit with the government. And we felt that borrowing the money, while yes, exposed us to having increased our debt to GDP, but we believe the country is going to do better. And if it does better, it means that we can pay off the loans earlier, and then the additional amount of revenue that's being generated could now be used to fund other important projects in St. Lucia, including the highway. So we've already said that we're going to take $28 off of the $98 to assign towards the highway. And that if in fact we're able to be successful, and we think that if we can increase our tourism arrivals currently, which are at 400,000, but we believe that between the cruise ship home porting and the new rooms that are about to begin construction in St. Lucia, the combination of those two at minimum is going to increase by another 100,000 arrivals, but potentially could actually increase it to 250,000 arrivals, which means that we could pay off the loan, Mr. Speaker, in less than 10 years. And that's huge because in paying off the loan in less than 10 years, it also means you're going to be spending less money on interest, and now you're going to have cash available to you. And when we looked at our debt to GDP numbers, that unlike Barbados and unlike Jamaica, which were over 100%, in fact, both of them well over 100%, they just didn't have that fiscal space to take on that risk. Whereas we genuinely believe that by investing in the airport, the monies that we're investing in the road rehabilitation projects, and with the FDI, the foreign direct investment coming into St. Lucia, that we believe that we can grow by more than 5% per year. And if we grow by more than 5%, or at least 5% per year, we will see a decline in the debt to GDP numbers. Now, members of the opposite side, Mr. Speaker, have from the time that we've gotten into office, and we've been doing what we've been doing, have been making the allegation that, I think the member from Castries, he says we're reckless, we're irresponsible. But yet, how does a reckless and irresponsible party, that according to his own numbers, that we've only achieved 2 bridges, been able to reduce the debt to GDP in this country from 69% to 64%? How is it that we've grown the economy for 3 years? How is it that the tax revenues in this country are higher than $1.1 billion? How is it that corporate tax went from 75 million to 90 million? And let's remember that in addition to the things that he's alleging, we also reduced the taxes. So we've not achieved those numbers by taxing people. We believe in the economy. We believe in the private sector in this country. We believe in the capability of the people of this country. And we have empowered them. That's what we've done. So it says to you that they have a very naive and a very simple version of how the economy works. But then we should not be surprised, because we have 15 years of a Minister of Finance that has been a dismal failure. The only thing that he's been able to increase is the debt of this country. And that has come at the expense of the reputation of the country, the confidence of the country. It has come at the expense of the more vulnerable people of our society, because government has not been in a position to be able to help them. So that was a very clear choice that we made. And when we came to present the $100 million loan, we said that. We said, yes, we understand what the contingent liability is. We understand what the potential impact of that contingent liability is going to be. But we believe that that's a risk-taking because the reward on the other side is so significant. And that when we were able to now negotiate with the Taiwanese, and especially Exim Bank, and to get the concessionary rate and terms of the loan, it made the decision that much easier. And we said, the condition of having to use a Taiwanese construction company, particularly a company that is partially owned public and private sector, particularly one that has the level of experience that they have since 1994, on completing projects on time, completing projects within budget, and providing world-class standards, that we felt comfortable in moving that direction. And so the governance structure of the loan is theirs. Now, Mr. Speaker, members on the other side would also have you believe somehow that by having a concessionaire reduces the risk the country has. And that somehow if the project is over budget or it's late, that it's not the people of St. Lucia that's going to pay the bill. And there's nothing that can be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. Because the revenue that's coming in for the project is the revenue from the airport tax. That's our money. That's a concept that the members of the other side, and particularly of the Labour Party, have not understood. As if that's just falling from the sky and it's a gift from somebody else, and you're not supposed to be thinking of it as your resources. When the member talks about that we come here and callously want to approve a $202 million budget, Mr. Speaker, the callous persons were the members on the opposite side that when they had the $35 in place, that they took that off. That's when it was callous. Because if they had left it on, Mr. Speaker, we would be much more advanced than we are, and we'd have to be borrowing substantially less money today than we're having to. That is the level of irresponsibility and the pettiness that takes place as members on the other side. And it's that pettiness and their emphasis on politics that put the country in the mess that it was in. But in 3 years, members on this side have been able to manage the economy and reverse the trends and bring confidence back into this country. The member from Castries East also made mention, you're taking this chance. What happens if we don't have arrivals? Well, we've looked at the history of 40 years where we've had the czars, we've had 9/11, we've had a recession, we've had natural disasters. And what time has shown us is that tourism is substantially more resilient than everybody's been giving it credit for. In fact, the industry that has rebounded the fastest globally after the recession was tourism. The fastest growing industry in the world. And the fact is, and I think the Minister of Tourism alluded to it, that it's no longer a luxury to go on a vacation. People want to go on a vacation. And we're seeing that global trends are growing significantly. And our proximity to some of the fastest growing economies gives us the confidence that this is going to continue. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, that when we think of it in absolute terms and percentage terms, the Caribbean is only 1.5% of global tourism. And St. Lucia is only 1.5% of Caribbean's tourism. To put it even in more specific numbers, St. Lucia currently gets about 170 or 180,000 US arrivals. Jamaica gets 750,000 US arrivals from the tri-state, from Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, by themselves. Aruba, which is the same distance away as we are from New York City, gets 3 times the amount of arrivals that we're getting. So we genuinely believe that the capacity for St. Lucia to be able to grow is there. And that's the difference between members on this side. We believe in St. Lucia. We believe in a country in which we can prosper more. And we believe, yes, that people are tired of living in ghettos. And people aspire for much more than that. But members on the other side, Mr. Speaker, continuously don't have faith, don't want to dream about a better day for St. Lucians, and are not willing to work hard and challenge themselves to be able to deliver to the people of St. Lucia what they so richly deserve. Members on the other side want to confuse everybody about the size of the loan. We were very clear. If I can, Mr. Speaker, if I can read from a Hansard report, which was the Honorable Stephenson King's presentation to the House when he presented the bill. He said, among those who came forward, Mr. Speaker, the government of the Republic of China, Taiwan, who offered US $150 million for infrastructure development. It is not a grant, it is a loan. It is a soft loan from the Export-Import Bank of Taiwan, and for this we decided our aging infrastructure needs attention. So we decided not simply to utilize the $150 million only for the airport, but to allocate $50 million for roads, schools, and housing, which we'll deal with a little later, and to utilize the $100 million for the redevelopment of the Huanora International Airport. We engaged, tried, tested, and proven architects and engineers who have been involved in the major airport development projects in the United States, particularly in Miami, which is hairy, and thought that we should probably rest our case there and continue what we started, for which the last administration purchased the last design and earned the rights to the design. I skip down to the next paragraph, and it says, once the project is completed, Mr. Speaker, and the intention of the government is to seek other avenues, both grant and loan funds, to meet the total cost of the facility of $175 million. That's going all the way back to when the bill was first presented, $175 million. The government believes that we can start the project and in the meantime negotiate for the balance. The project will entail, as I said earlier, on a new terminal with modern facilities, jet bridges, modern cargo handling and luggage screening, etc. Security and all of the services needed at the airport. The Prime Minister has indicated that the terminal will be stacked with departures to the top and arrivals to the ground floor. In addition to this, a new control tower will be constructed, but more than that, it's the existing project of the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Program, which will deal with the river, which often floods the airport, to take the water away from the airport and to ensure that the airport is safe. So we've been in discussions since then with the World Bank, both through an IDA fund and through DVRP, to be able to allocate funds to do a couple of things at the airport. One is to deal with the flood mitigation. Two is to do with the resurfacing of the runway. And three is to be able to build the taxiways. And that will be on top of the $175 million. That's what the cost of the program is. That's what the project is. And what we said is that we would have waited initially to have done the resurfacing of the runway, but the fact is that the World Bank are making extremely concessional funds available to us. And we believe it's more prudent at this point to proceed with the resurfacing and the taxiway, and not to wait, because those funds are going to be made available. So I'm hoping to be able to announce that very soon, Mr. Speaker, and we obviously will come back to the House to do the approval process on those funds for that project. But the Minister was very clear. There was no ambiguity, Mr. Speaker. None. So I'm shocked and dismayed at the attempts of the members on the other side to continue to try to convince people otherwise. We talk about that we're borrowing this money, and this money could have been used to be able to do other projects and social programs. The monies that we're borrowing are coming from the tourist. 85% of the people who are going through the airport are tourists. But that doesn't mean that we have not been committed to the social development of this country. We've allocated last year 10 million, the first year 5 million, and this year another 10 million towards the rehabilitation of the schools. And as the Minister Southeast indicated, that doesn't include Choiseul. And the roofs at the schools. We're spending money to fix up the roads. We're spending almost $114 million in the next couple of months. We've been able to finalize the negotiations with the British through CDB to spend £30 million on rehabilitating the West Coast Road. We're finalizing the Japanese loan, JICA, which is about $40 million for the bridge in cul-de-sac. We're also negotiating with the Taiwanese to finalize the loans for St. Jude's, which will be about $30 million, and also for the new police headquarters. We've put in over 160 cameras in Gros-Islet and down to Castries, and we're now about to add another 160 cameras in the Castries market. And we have now the center, the command center, operational up, where we've now combined the fire response numbers and the police response numbers. We've now put a new communication system in for the policemen. So it means that they have a VHS system dedicated to them, both in the cars and then when they travel themselves, and specific handheld units for the firemen, which are waterproof. We've gotten 4 of the Coast Guard boats up and operating. We've gotten the new forensic lab fully operational. We intend to, when we build a new police headquarters in Castries at the old prison, to now include 7 courts. We're in the process of putting a new healthcare facility on the chaussee and upgrading the facility there, which would allow us now to close down Victoria completely. We are spending $12 million on US on sporting facilities. The one in Soufriere mini stadium has already begun, and we hope to have it completed in record time. We're also going to be opening up the first dedicated sports academy using the Grosley School. We're fixing up all of the health centers and making them green. And at the same time, we've borrowed $15 million US from the World Bank in order to put new equipment into those facilities, in order that people go there first, and that the first call doesn't mean that you're going to go to the hospital. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not a government that is narrow-minded and only thinking about politics, but genuinely improving the quality of life of people in this country. I'm so happy to see the number of housing projects that are getting off the ground. In Beauchamp, in Choiseul, in Choc, as well as I know that Proud is doing several projects, including one at Angers in my constituency, and soon in Dennery. And that we talk about doing them on a joint venture basis with private sector people, where government is putting in the land and putting in the incentives. We've put over $20 million into the St. Lucia Development Bank, and we're about to bring to the House a guarantee for $10 million more to facilitate young entrepreneurs in order that they can invest equity into small businesses in this country. So it is unfair to say that government has not been paying attention to the softer things in this country. We've just added 80 more caretakers in the caretakers program, 80. We've added 3 more social workers, and we want to be able to double that amount within the next 2 years. This is a government that's committed to being able to help the more vulnerable people in our society. The one project that we're very excited about is the health care insurance that we're going to hope to have ready to come to this House by January, and we're looking to have it implemented by April of next year on schedule. So, Mr. Speaker, these are not true. I want to deal, Mr. Speaker, with what I consider to be the very dangerous statements made by the member from Vieux Fort South. I have to say to you, I was really taken aback that he would have gone to the extent that he has to try to derail this project. And in doing so, trying to undermine the credibility of the Bank of St. Lucia. And particularly given the track record of the bank while he was Minister of Finance, I thought that he would not have gone there. Because that's certainly, I would say to you, if there wants to be an opening of a discussion, clearly that's what we should really be talking about, how the bank found itself in that position. But in the last 3 years, the bank has right-sided up. And I want to read, if I can, you have the Social and Economic Review. In the 2018 Social and Economic Review, Mr. Speaker, if I can go to page 62, and the heading is the banking sector. And it says, developments in the financial and monetary sector in 2018 were largely influenced by positive developments in the wider economy. Net foreign assets continued to accelerate despite a drop in St. Lucia's imputed reserves at the ECCB. Notwithstanding a reduction in lending rates, domestic credit weakened further in 2018 amidst persistent deposit growth, resulting in rising liquidity in the banking system. Rise in liquidity. Interest rates are coming down. I mean, and I know that he's an economist, and I know he understands the mathematics of a bank. If a bank has a deposit and is paying interest, I really resent that statement because it's so erroneous. And I actually think you ought to ask him to take back that statement, because that's a very derogatory statement, to even make the suggestion that a prime minister or minister of finance has the ability to plunder the Bank of St. Lucia. But that is what the people of this country have come accustomed to, that only when he's in charge and he is the prime minister, everything is good. But when he is not in charge and he's not in control, everything is bad, and the worst in everybody comes out. But you see, his genuine lack of trust of the people of this country comes out through his bitterness. Cannot stand to sit there and to see that somebody else is going to be successful. Can't stand to see that the fact that the country is turning around, that the economy is growing. In fact, that the bank can afford to be able to give a loan at 5%. That's what the truth is. And I think, anyway, the stock of net domestic credit continued to trend downward from its peak in 2013, declining by 3.3% in 2018. This decline was largely driven by a 14.5% growth in net liabilities to non-financial public enterprises as their bank deposits rose substantially. The continued contraction in private sector credit also contributed to the reduction in domestic credit, reflecting decreases in both business and household credit by 2.8% and 1.6% respectively. These declines overshadowed a 9.9% increase in the net credit to the general government to $210 million. So the bank's own report shows that its profitability has come back, and it's substantially increased the amount of profits it has, that the economy is turning around, and that they're seeing these deposits. And these deposits actually are liabilities on the bank when the bank sits on this money. So one, I want to say very clear that my government has the greatest amount of confidence in St. Lucians and St. Lucian institutions. And we believe that those institutions ought to get a piece of the cake of development in this country. So when you have a loan that is now being backed by two things, one, an airport tax of which the numbers are measurable and have been reliable, furthermore, substantiated and supported by a government guarantee, why should we go out if in fact you have local institutions prepared to pay that, to make that money? Furthermore, I am proud of the fact that the Bank of St. Lucia has taken a lead role in order to syndicate the loan. And the syndication is to not just here in St. Lucia, but in the region. I'm also happy to report to the House that that syndication is oversubscribed. And I'm sure once the syndication is completed, the bank will make available who the syndicates are. But I am not at liberty to do that at this point. And the member from Beaufort South knows that. He knows what the system is. We're not involved. And the fact is, if it's going to be syndicated, based on the same recommendation they were saying we should do a bond. Well, we did it through the bank. And so the commitment fee of 0.75% is in order to be able to help the bank pay for putting that syndication together. The last thing I really want to bring up, Mr. Speaker, and it's again a sad indictment on members on the other side, particularly on the member from Castries South, who continues to perpetuate this argument that somehow that there is a U.S. investigation into the airport project in St. Lucia. In fact, there's nothing further from the truth. The investigation was instigated by this government, members of the other side, in where they hired Bob Lindquist to be able to do an investigation. And when Mr. Lindquist failed to find the information that they wanted, so in fact, there are several things that Mr. Lindquist unearthed which they have not chosen to share. But they were not happy with his findings and in fact wanted more. And so Mr. Lindquist asked them to make a request of the U.S. government to get the telephone records of Mr. Ascenso. And a letter was written to the Justice Department in the U.S. for that request. And in that letter indicated that Minister Guy Joseph and myself were persons of interest. Now, first of all, I don't know that the Attorney General, sorry, Mr. AG, has the ability to start and be part of a criminal investigation. I thought that that was the role of the DPP. But in this case, it was the AG who wrote to say that these people were persons of interest. And I'm so happy that the member from Castries East, former AG, the members from Castries East talked about the uniqueness of SLASPA. In that SLASPA has two ministers that it reports to. It reports to the Minister of Infrastructure for day-to-day operations, and it reports to the Minister of Finance for financial matters. So that in the matter of the concession that was being negotiated at SLASPA, the former AG made the allegation that Minister Guy Joseph, when he was the Minister of Infrastructure, threatened the then managing director of SLASPA that if he did not put A&M on the short list and have them approved, he would have them fired. Well, there's another interesting, unique feature of the SLASPA rules, that the minister that approves the appointment of the managing director of SLASPA is the Minister of Finance, not the Minister of Infrastructure. And the persons that actually hire the managing director is the board. That's who he reports to. And in fact, the minister, the board, the managing director, is an ex officio officer on the board. So he doesn't even get to vote. So imagine Sean Matthews trembling in his boots that somehow the minister is going to have him fire, a minister that is not involved in his hiring or in his firing. He himself cannot vote at SLASPA, finds a way to bring A&M onto the short list. I still haven't figured out how he's done that. The next part that's interesting is that the SLASPA board is very much of a prescribed board, meaning that the chairperson of SLASPA, Mr. Speaker, is always the director of finance. And in those days, it was Isaac Anthony, the PS of finance. Okay. The PS of finance. In our case, it happens to be the same because when Mr. Isaac Anthony was there, he was both. The next thing is that the deputy chairperson of the SLASPA board is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Communications and Works and Infrastructure. And the person that was then the PS was Alison Jean. The AG's office, in their own right, appointed somebody. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a lady, I can't remember her name, but a very, very prominent lady and very effective. And then they also had the private sector meets appointments. So Jared Bergas, if I'm not mistaken, was on the board, etc. And Georgia Steele. So here you have this independent board of people that we know in our society and that we have the highest regard for. That somehow Guy Joseph, along with Sean Matthews, engineered and maneuvered all those board members to accept A&M on the list. And at once now that that's approved at the board level, the board then makes the recommendation and it goes to cabinet. And at cabinet, right, who is the person that gets it? The Minister of Finance presents it at cabinet and it's voted on at cabinet. So I fail to understand how the then AG, could have made these allegations against Minister Joseph, particularly knowing what the structure that we had. So the next thing that we had is that a request then was made with that letter to get telephone numbers. That's what the request was for, to get telephone numbers that were made by Mr. Asenza on his phone. Sorry? That's what the requests to the courts were made, was for phone numbers. And it was supposed to remain under, what was it called? Seal. And somehow in the system, we don't know how, that somehow it did not get under seal, and this information then came out public. And it was through that we discovered on this side that there was actually an investigation. Because when we came into office, Mr. Speaker, there was no file at the Attorney General's office, despite the fact that the Attorney General was the person. Then the next thing that happened is that the Attorney General was left in charge of what it was supposed to be. Followed by what? That the Accountant General's office that was making the payments of $1 million, all that they had was a signature page of the contract. And we would know through the Financial Act that there is a requirement that the Accountant General's office has a copy of the contract. The Cabinet Secretary's office that was heavily involved. No files, no information, the greatest amount of secrecy. So I go into this level of detail to assure the public of St. Lucia that when I went and did my investigation to find out whether in fact there was an investigation into the members of any of this government, including myself, to find out that no, there was no investigation by the Justice Department. In fact, we have a letter from the Justice Department stating that there is no investigations ongoing in St. Lucia. It was simply responding to a request by a friendly government that had made the allegation that there was some fraudulent behavior, particularly criminal, in order to help justify them getting the information. But we shouldn't be surprised. So after 5 years, again, like everything else, they couldn't see it through. $1 million US was spent on the investigation. And I know that the member from Castries Southeast has challenged the members from the other side to produce the report. He keeps on bringing up the Richard Frederick statement, but I want to know, how can I take Richard Frederick as being credible when he was at one point on United Workers' Party? When he got kicked out of the United Workers' Party, he then found himself on the platform of the Labour Party. Now, my information indicates to me that he is now a full-fledged member, and they are actually considering to have him run in Castries Central. So how is it that I am supposed to take any statement made by Richard Frederick, a man who is in court on many cases right now? I believe he just lost a case in court. So all I'm saying, I have sued him. I've sued him. I have sued him. I've sued him. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to bring this to an end. There is absolutely...
Honorable Prime Minister, honorable members, we've gone well this morning. Not because it's getting to the night time that we should get out of. Mr. Prime Minister, you may continue, sir.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that we can put this matter to rest, that there is no U.S. investigation in NT ministers. There's absolutely no proof or anything that went wrong previously. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, for those members in the general public, there was never any money. The project was never funded. In fact, members on this side and the Minister of Finance will remember that when we were in the negotiations with Deutsche Bank, we were trying to restrict the loan to be less than 6%.
Honorable members, allow the Prime Minister. I need to hear the Prime Minister. The 1, 2, 3, 4 of you can take on. I am not going to be a party to that. The Honorable Prime Minister, I'm trying to protect you somehow. You may continue now.
So, Mr. Speaker, I want to re-emphasize the point that this noise that is being made by the members on the opposite side has no validity. Okay? These are pure false allegations. There is no proof of any wrongdoing. None. In fact, they know that. In fact, the report that they have says that. But maybe one day, they'll produce the report. One day, they'll make the report public. Okay? So at the end of the day, so, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the public of St. Lucia that the government has acted extremely responsibly in this airport development project, that we are going to deliver a world-class project. I have the greatest amount of confidence in OECC and their reputation and their ability to deliver this project on time and within budget. I am very comfortable with the governance structures that they have. So, Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the Bank of St. Lucia for agreeing to head up this syndication, and I want to thank all of the regional institutions that have agreed to help fund this project. And I'm looking forward to being able to deliver to the people of this country a world-class transportation system, and to be able to unlock the blockage that we have in being able to grow a country. And to all the young people in the South, that these projects are real, these projects are being done with them in mind in order to be able to uplift them and their opportunities in St. Lucia. I thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to guarantee a loan in the amount of EC 202,500,000 from the Bank of St. Lucia Limited by the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority for the purpose of financing the Hira-Nora International Airport Redevelopment Project. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years inclusive of a grace period of 5 years on the principal payments with interest only paid. B, the interest is payable quarterly from the date of the initial disbursement of the loan amount and is payable at a rate of 5.5% per annum during a grace period of 5 years. C, the interest is payable semi-annually at a rate of up to 5% per annum at the expiry of the grace period of 5 years. And D, a commitment fee of 0.75% is payable on the disbursement of the loan. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. Honourable members, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided under Section 109(1)(a) of the Value Added Tax Act, Cap 15.42, the Act that the Minister responsible for Finance may by order publish in the Gazette amend the schedules to the Act. And whereas it is further provided under Section 109(2) of the Act that an order made pursuant to Section 109(1) of the Act is subject to an affirmative resolution of the Parliamentary, except where the amendment is made to the customs tariff headings only. And whereas the Minister responsible for Finance seeks approval of the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order to amend Schedule 3 of the Act by affirmative resolution of Parliament and to exempt the import of goods or services for the Hira-Nora International Airport Redevelopment Project for a period of 4 years and 1 month, commencing from the first day of June 2018 and terminating on the 30th day of June 2022. Be it resolved that Parliament by affirmative resolution approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt the import of goods or services for the Hira-Nora International Airport Redevelopment Project for a period of 4 years and 1 month commencing from the first day of June 2018 and terminating on the 30th day of June 2022. Mr. Speaker, the resolution before Parliament seeks the approval for services rendered and goods purchased in relation to the Hunor International Airport Redevelopment Project to be added to Schedule 3 of the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 15.42, during the duration of the construction works of the HIA. The objectives of the HIA redevelopment project are to alleviate the congestion during the peak arrival and departure times, which contributes to the discomfort of the passengers and impacts negatively on the passenger experience, and accommodate anticipated future growth in air passenger traffic. To implement urgent investments that will position SLASPA to take advantage of St. Lucia's competitive advantage as the ideal location for a hub for regional travelers and improve the earning potential of SLASPA, and to expand the infrastructure of St. Lucia and increase the capacity of the country to accommodate growth in tourism. The capacity constraints which the HIA faces has compromised the ability of the HIA to facilitate increased traffic and improve the quality of guest experiences. Additionally, the HIA is in its current form makes and contravenes certain international security protocols, particularly as it relates to both inbound and outbound passengers interacting with each other as they traverse the facility. The redevelopment of HIA will alleviate the many challenges which plague the airport and will ensure the facility can cater to the anticipated growth in the tourism industry by accommodating more airlines in the airport space. The expected outputs from the redevelopment includes a new terminal building, control tower, apron, taxiway, airfield and ground lighting system, and car park and roadway. In order to effectively implement the HIA project, it is envisaged that the design consultant and contractor will have to import equipment, materials, and supplies for the purpose of carrying out the works. To minimize the capital costs required for this project and to minimize the likelihood of delays, the Government of St. Lucia, on behalf of the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority, is seeking a waiver of value-added tax for all expenditure associated directly with the HIA redevelopment project during the duration of the project. As such, the Government of St. Lucia is requesting that all goods purchased and services rendered in relation to the HIA redevelopment project shall be added to the Schedule 3 of the Value Added Tax Act 15.42 during the duration of the construction works at the HIA, which is from the period of June 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2022.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to exempt the import of goods or services for the Hunor International Airport Redevelopment Project for a period of 4 years and 1 month, commencing from the first day of June 2018 and terminating on the 30th day of June 2022. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Hunor Airport debate, let me say, will not go. It will not stop. It cannot stop because we are convinced on this side of the House that it's the wrong way to go. Mr. Speaker, we are convinced by evidence. Mr. Speaker, it's surprising how the Prime Minister says things that he knows are not true. For the member for Castries Southeast, I will not get involved in what he says. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that the concessionaire who would build the airport, if the airport had failed, it would be the responsibility of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the concessionaire contract requires the private investor to post a completion bond to compensate the government of St. Lucia for delays or violations of performance requirements. That is what the PPP agreement said, that they would set up a performance bond. The performance bond means that if there were any delays, if there were any cost overruns, the concessionaire would there will be no responsibility on the government of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the agreement, the Prime Minister says that there was nothing, when he came, there was nothing in terms of the airport. And the member for Cash's office says that Slasper would have no money because only what they'd get money from would be from because the concessionaire would take all the money. Here's what the agreement says. The concessionaire will collect and remit monthly to Slasper.
The member is quoting from a document. Can it be made a document of the House?
These are my notes, no document. That's my notes.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the member is quoting from a document as an official document of the House. Okay. Mr. Speaker, I was saying that if the member is quoting from a document to say that to refute a point made by the Prime Minister, he has to make that a document of the House, that we can see that it's an official document and not a make-up document that the member is using. So to say that's his notes and to come and read a statement to say that's part of an agreement. So, Mr. Speaker, if he cannot make it a document of the House, he has to withdraw that statement and that must be removed from the record.
Honorable members, I'm not going there. But Leader of the Opposition, that's why I'm coming to you. What is presently before the House is the value-added tax resolution of Parliament to approve a draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order. That is what is currently before me. I was giving you some space because I will not just simply stop any member. I am giving all honorable members, this is what is before the House right now, the value-added tax, a resolution of Parliament. That is what's before the House. I give you some leeway. I try not to interfere. Please note, I'm going to allow you to continue, but take note what section 45(3) of our standing orders. Yes, so All I'm saying to you, take note of that section. Okay? I am not, so navigate whatever you're going to say, but take note of this section. This is, although we're in the same session, although it appears we're touching on the same topic, but remember, it's a different motion before the House. Continue, Honorable Goods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I respect your ruling, but we're speaking about Hiwanora International Airport. We're speaking about VAT on goods and services, and we're speaking about the waiving VAT for the purchase of goods for the Hiwanora International Airport and services at the Hiwanora International Airport. So what I was saying, in terms of the Hiwanora International Airport, it was stated that SLASPA, the entity that we are guaranteeing the loan for, would have no income because
We
it was
have
lost.
guaranteed.
The loan
It's
we have
past
granted
tense.
for.
It's
Thank
past
you.
tense.
We have guaranteed the loan for, would have no income. And I'm making it, and I'm saying to this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, that is not true. Because SLASPA would have all passenger security charges, navigation, and communication charges. SLASPA would, and it further says that the government at will, these two charges, the government at will could increase it or decrease it at will. That had absolutely nothing to do with the concessionary agreement. Absolutely nothing. It had nothing to do with the concessionary agreement. So I just want to make a point that it is wrong to say that the only income that SLASPA would have would be from the airport development
Mr. Speaker,
tax. Mr. Speaker, what is
Madam
he
Clerk,
writing? What is he writing?
Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, I expect you to say you're standing on the point of
on
order.
point of order,
What point of order?
If-
in the House.
On what point of order?
Okay? He's misleading the House in that when the member made
Honorable, just hold on. If it's a point of order, you say it immediately.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't said
No.
nothing.
If
Just
he
say
says,
point of order.
if
What's
he
the point
says
of
he's standing on a
What's
point
the
of,
point of order?
if he says he's standing on a point of order, you sit immediately and allow him to so explain.
Mr. Speaker, members on this side made reference to the $25 that was currently being collected by SLASPA in order to pay for SLASPA's operations. That money was going to be included in the $60 or whatever amount that they were going to be given. The amounts that the member from Castries East are referring to are like $2 or $3. These are standard charges for navigational fees. This is not going to in any way support the operations of SLASPA. If you take away the $25 currently that SLASPA is earning,
Dear viewers, just recognize that we're having some technical difficulties with the microphones within the Parliament chamber, and we're going to have a suspension of the proceedings for 10 minutes. We still have a number of bills to be laid today. We've just had some motions being presented, and just to let you know that the suspension is expected to be for about 10 minutes. We have a number of bills to be laid by the Honorable Prime Minister, the Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service. And we're also expected to have some by the Honorable Minister for Education, Innovation, Gender Relations, and Sustainable Development, and also by the Honorable Minister for Equity, Social Justice, Local Government, and Empowerment, Representative for Gozele, the Honorable Leonard Spider Motu. So we're expecting that hopefully we can have this resolution through the situation, you notice that the speakers had to suspend briefly on a couple of occasions before actually calling for this break for the matter to be sorted out, and hopefully that can be done within the 10 minutes that we're going to have the break. So we've had a particularly long day. First of all, the day starting with the usual prayers and the announcements by the speaker, and also statement by ministers. There were a number of papers laid. First of all, by the Honorable Prime Minister Alan Chasney, who's also the Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service. And earlier on today, we also had papers being laid by the Honorable Minister for Tourism, Information Broadcasting, Culture, Creative Industries, Honorable Dominic Fede, and also by the Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs, Honorable Bradley Felix. So these are some of the matters being laid before us today. We had a couple of motions as well by the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, looking at Parliament to authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow by means of advances sums not exceeding $55 million from the commercial banks rather, for a period of 6 months. And also it was called to resolve that Parliament authorized the Minister for Finance to also guarantee a sum in the amount of $202 million, a little over, from the Bank of St. Lucia Limited, and for the by the St. Lucia ANC Port Authority for their purposes of financing the Huronori International Airport Development Project. So these are some of the main highlights at today's sitting. We're going to have a break, and hopefully it will be attended to, and we'll be resuming. So we'll be back in just a moment. So stay tuned to the National Television Network as we anticipate we're going to have a resumption in about 5 minutes time or so. I'm Ryan O'Brien. Please join us. We'll be back in just a moment.